Hey guys, it's Lockie here from Pax8 and I'm joined here by...
Jesse from Pax8 as well.
And today we're going to talk all things cyber related. We've got a pretty fun conversation around risk, compliance and frameworks, and we hope that you get a few tools to add to your tool belt when it comes to building out a cyber program.
To me, Lockie, one of the most important parts around cybersecurity is reducing risk. Why do you think that people need to take a reducing risk approach towards security, and why is that important?
I think the simplest answer to give there is it allows you to prioritize where you're focusing your efforts on. When you take a compliance-based approach or a tooling-based approach, you're just trying to smooth over the cracks and you're not looking at the foundation.
Yeah, so it's, I guess, going more deep than just ticking a box, right? It's actually going and trying to stop them.
100%. It's letting you contextualize what the actual risk is to the business and how cybersecurity is helping to reduce that, as you would say, with a risk-reduced approach, rather than just throwing tooling or money at a wall and hoping the problem goes away.
Yeah, okay. You also mentioned compliance before. I guess, how do frameworks tie into this whole conversation?
Frameworks really just give you a pathway for how to achieve what you're trying to do. A lot of risks in cybersecurity aren't uncommon. Other organizations and businesses have probably ran into the same risks you have ran into at one point on their journey. A framework just gives you that roadmap of, oh, okay, here's my problem. What control from what framework can I map it to help standardize it?
That makes sense. And something that I run into quite often is people trying to decide what framework they should be aligning to. I guess there's a lot out there, there's a lot of different frameworks. What would you suggest people take into consideration when they're picking one?
There's a lot, to be honest. I think the simplest way is to understand the business's operating environment, internal, external, what your external stakeholders may be looking at, contractual, regulatory, compliance-wise. If the industry you work in tells you that, hey, you guys need to have PCI because you're doing credit card payments, it's a no-brainer. You're going to go and do PCI. At the end of the day, though, you may not have those sort of pressures for the industry you work in. And from there, that really opens the can of worms of, well, if I don't have any real pressure on what to select as a framework, what should I go with?
Okay. And I mean, Essential 8 is another one that we hear quite often being in Australia, and it's a framework that a lot of businesses talk to me about every day. I know I have quite strong views around Essential 8, but I guess what's your perspective on it?
It's a starting point. I mean, it's better than doing nothing. It's not the be-all and end-all. It's not a holistic framework, but if you are going from a maturity level of 0, aka no cybersecurity practice, and you just need to establish some form of cybersecurity, Essential 8 is a great starting point. Is it something that you can, does it provide strategic value over time? In 3 years' time, should you still keep just aiming for the Essential 8? If you want to do that, go ahead, but I don't think you're going to get any good return on value by doing that. I think there's far more comprehensive cybersecurity frameworks out there. You could start with your CIS as your top 20. You can move ahead and look at ISO, more mature frameworks like that. But Essential 8, probably a good starting point. From I guess, Jesse, in your role, you come across a lot more technical solutions. What do you think is a nice framework for a starting point if I had nothing in place?
Oh, there's a lot out there. I think I do agree with you on the Essential 8 front being a good starting point, especially since it is government, pushed out. And I think that also comes back to what you were talking about earlier around there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach for businesses out there. They do need to assess what's going to make sense for them, what's going to make sense for their clients, and that's going to tie into it a lot. So it's a bit of a loaded question you've hit me with there.
No, that's fair.
But look, there's plenty of great ones out there. SMB 1001, CIS controls is probably my favorite, then Essential 8 as well.
Awesome. I think sort of what you're validating there is that any 3 of those frameworks we've mentioned as a starting point, so Essential 8, SMB 1001 or CIS, those are better than not doing anything at all. Just choose something that's attainable, that you don't need to dump resources in, being, employee power, money, buying new tooling, just something simple to get started with. And then once you get there, look at the horizon and where you want it to go to next.
Yeah. What I've found as well with Essential 8, and I don't know whether you've got a similar opinion on this, but it is something that a lot of people know about. So if you are talking to businesses that aren't technically minded and you talk about Essential 8, they've heard about it before. They've seen it on TV. I think my grandma's even talked to me about Essential 8 once, right? Which astounding. But it can be a useful entry point into starting to discuss cyber and strategies around reducing that risk.
100%. I think at a Australian board level, Essential 8 has a lot more recognition. I believe it's AICD. They definitely talk about it a lot in, their courses and the content they put out. It's a good starting point, but I do have a few grievances with it as well. I know there's one that you like to point out that I don't want to steal yet, so I'll start with mine. And one of the things I don't like about Essential 8 is it doesn't really encourage management oversight and, running your security framework as a living, breathing program. It's more of a set and forget binary approach. Are you doing this? Are you doing that? Yep, well then good job. It doesn't look at the people and process part of the part of information technology. It just looks at the technology part and if you're just ticking some boxes on configurations.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you've raised there around set and forget. Security should never be something that you do once. It's not a set and forget, we're finished. Those threats are constantly evolving. They're finding newer, better, faster ways to get around us. So we need to be, trying to stay one step ahead, right? Always keeping up to date, and that's why you'll often hear the term security is a journey, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, even looking at some of the controls in the Essential 8, I think there's only one control that I can think of that actually encourages you to do a recurring test of the control, which is around backups, and that is run a BCP test once a year. You can't just do a test once a year. To get assurance that your security controls are working, you need to run a pretty comprehensive program, right? You need to be doing vulnerability management at a minimum. You need to be engaging pen testers that test your controls and say, all right, cool, this portal we found here doesn't have MFA on it. We were able to log in. As you said, it's a continuous journey. It's not just, all right, cool, we've crossed the road, we're here, we're done.
Yeah. You were going to raise one of my grievances earlier, so I might bring it up. I was having a read through of the ACSC cyber threat report for 2023 to 2024, and they were looking at what were the most reported cyber crimes to Australian businesses. And if you look at the list, it was email compromise was number one, followed by financial scams, and then business email compromise. Now, for a lot of people out there who are wondering what's the difference between email compromise and business email compromise, the business email compromise has a monetary figure tied to it. But I looked at that and I thought, hang on a minute, where does Essential 8 kind of cover a lot of those gaps? Like, yes, you can argue that MFA would help prevent email compromise, but if you look through the recommendations that ACSC was giving people, it was all centered around user training, making sure that people understand what kind of risks are coming into their environment. Then it was focused around phishing detection, being able to actually start reducing some of those threats coming in. Yet, where's the mention of that in Essential 8 at all?
Yeah, that's right. It's the Essential 8, not the Essential 9. There's no mitigation strategy for email protection, which is pretty interesting given how you highlighted in that report. A lot of the top threats were coming via email as the medium, right? Jesse, I know we've spoken down a bit about the Essential 8, but I still think there's some positives. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think that Essential 8 does have some really strong areas, right? If you look at what's included in their application and operating system patching, vulnerabilities on your endpoint or on any of your systems are a really easy way for attackers to compromise and exploit your system. So having some controls in there that are regularly checking that and regularly going and patching them is pretty important. MFA is another big one. Breach credentials are something that we see happening every single day. And it was one of the major threat vectors that we saw last year. Unfortunately, people's password hygiene just isn't great. How many of us are reusing the same passwords across multiple accounts?
It's crazy, isn't it? It's still happening. It's a problem we still have here in the 2020s, and it's been around since the 1990s.
Yeah, and MFA is at least a way that we can double check that people are who they say they are. Some sort of second mechanism, whether it's something that you are, something that you know, or something that you have. It's a way to at least double check that.
100%, and I think the Essential 8 really is in the title, essential. This is the bare minimum of what you should do, and if you do these, you really will reduce a lot of risk within your, cybersecurity program. It's awesome. So
yeah, I think backup's another one as well. It's not a matter of if you're going to get hit anymore. It is a matter of when. So
yeah.
speaking from experience, you definitely want to have a backup product in place.
100%. Good ransomware protection there. So, and I think one thing to sort of tie this all back together, it may sound like we're just ragging on Essential 8 because it's easy to pick on, but if you put any framework under a lens like we're doing now, you're always going to find faults with them. And the most important thing to sort of take away from this messaging here is that you can, paralyze yourself by analysis of controls. Oh, CIS says to do this, and SMB 1001 says do this, but then I've got ISO over here. It's so easy to get bogged down in that sort of control and compliance based approach. But let's go back to risk. Let's go back to using risk to reduce our risk, as simple as that sounds, right? So when we're looking at, if we run a risk assessment, and we run a risk assessment for a potential client, and they say, hey, we're going to launch the Essential 8, and we identify, oh, hey, you guys have a pretty big risk when it comes to business email compromise. You don't have any sort of detection capability of malicious emails being sent through. Essential 8 doesn't cover that. Should I raise that with them, or should I just leave it? Because Essential 8 doesn't cover email.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I mean, that's where it all comes back to what your goals are around security. If your goals are just compliance focused, then you're going to let a lot of stuff through. If your goals are around actually addressing those risks and reducing them, then that's where you come across a scenario like that and you go, well, hang on a minute, let's think outside the box a little bit rather than just sticking to what Essential 8 says. Why don't we look to complement it with other different controls?
And I love that, complementing it. It's not about deciding we are an Essential 8 only shop, we are an SMB 1001 only shop. If you identify a risk and the framework that you predominantly align with doesn't help you address that risk, you don't need to throw the framework away. You don't need to go and adopt an entirely new framework. You can go look at other frameworks and you might say, this control here from NIST CSF perfectly covers what we're trying to resolve here. And you can implement that and you can still keep your alignment with Essential 8. You can still keep your alignment with SMB 1001, but you're not hemorrhaging yourself and you're not getting bogged down in, oh, my framework doesn't cover this, I can't do it, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great approach. So, I mean, that way you can still utilize a framework like Essential 8 and then plug a lot of those gaps with controls from other offerings like CIS, like NIST, like ISO, etc.
Yeah, 100%.
So, for our viewers today, Lockie, if they're looking to go and start reducing that risk and maybe they're tossing up between which framework or how to more mature their security offering, what would be your recommendation for them to go and do today?
My first step is I'm going to try and contextualize and understand what am I protecting, okay? I'm looking at my assets, and when I say asset, I don't mean build a spreadsheet out, get every host name of the laptop of the business in here. I'm talking at a high level, predominantly, if this stops, what's the impact to the business? If we lose our email gateway, what happens? That's an asset. If we lose our frontline services, so maybe we're a call center and the call center goes down, that's an asset. I'm identifying those sort of high-level strategic assets that provide value to the business, and I'm then going to start looking at what risks are they exposed to there. Now, risk can be very subjective. And something I want to cover here is that firstly, a missing control is not a risk, okay? You need to contextualize why is the control missing. Is password management missing because the application uses SSO? Then we don't need to deep dive into the password management control. We can contextualize that and say, well, this already has SSO. I don't need to go down that path there. So that's very important to do. So once I've started doing sort of that risk-based approach, I'm looking at the asset and I'm understanding, hey, what vulnerabilities exist within it, what weaknesses are there that could be exploited by maybe a malicious employee, a external threat actor. I'm applying that sort of lens to it and I'm building out a bit of a risk assessment there. So I'm understanding, hey, we might have a DLP issue with our internal database where all of finance all have admin access to the database. There's no logging and monitoring on it. The risk there is data exfiltration. The business's sensitive financial data could be exfiltrated by a malicious employee. Then I'm looking at my framework and I'm saying, what controls can I apply from the Essential 8? What controls could I apply from CIS Top 20 to lower that risk, lower the chance of that risk scenario occurring? So if we were to take a control from the Essential 8, it would be something around administrative users, right? And ensuring that, administrative users aren't applied to everyone, that there's a process for managing that around there. So that's kind of the approach I would start taking there. When it comes to, just to take a step back and I say, when I look at my framework and what controls are going to take from there, if you've sat down and you've sort of looked at those internal and external pressures that you have, internal being employees, stakeholders, all that kind of stuff, what they're expecting from you from cybersecurity, external being regulatory, contractual, the industry you work in as well, just as a few examples. If you've looked at all those, and then there's no distinct framework that jumps out, like your ISOs of the world, your Essential 8, CIS, nothing like that, then you can make the decision yourself, hey, maybe we do Essential 8 because it's known to everyone. Maybe we do SMB 1001 because one of our board members mentioned, hey, this looks really cool, we should try and go for it. That's where you start pulling your framework and controls out there. So that's probably how I would start. Asset identification, contextualize the risk to those assets, what could happen. I'm contextualizing that by looking for weaknesses in the asset. So I'm understanding the workflow, how the business is using that, how employees interact with it, how customers interact with it. I'm looking for deficiencies of controls in there. And then I'm looking back at my framework that I've selected to say, okay, there's no DLP. What can I do to fix that? What's a control I should put in there? And using that framework as guidance for, sort of what we need to do to secure it.
And I guess for our partners out there that are looking to get started on that security journey, we at Pax8 are here to help you. So we do have a lot of resources available to you, whether it's through our Pax8 Academy, whether it's through our CIS consultations. Reach out to us and come and have a chat. Let us know what you guys are doing from a framework perspective. What's working for you? How are you assessing risk?